The morning he walked away, I felt nothing, and that terrified me far more than the grief I expected. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the trash trucks hadn't come yet, and the smell of rotting citrus from the neighbor's bin hung low over Pelworth Street like a dirty curtain. I was standing at the number 47 bus stop with Odessa on my left hip and Finn asleep in the stroller, and Radlow, that's what I'll call him for the rest of this, because his real name still tastes like copper in my mouth. Radlow had his duffel bag over one shoulder and his eyes fixed on the middle distance, the way men look when they've already rehearsed the goodbye 1,000 times and the live performance bores them. "I can't do this," he said. Not we, I. He wasn't talking about us. He was talking about himself, which was the only conversation Radlow ever truly wanted to have. I shifted Odessa to my other hip. She was 22 months old. She smelled like sleep and dry milk and something warm and specific that I have never been able to name. Finn, her twin, made a small sound in the stroller. Not quite a word, not quite a cry, just a vibration of being alive. I looked at Radlow's profile. I thought, he has already left. The body is just catching up. "Okay," I said. He blinked. I think he expected more. Tears, maybe. Argument, the whole theater of it. Instead, I watched the 47 appear at the far bend of Witchfield Road, that boxy orange shape pushing through the gray morning like something blunt and inevitable, and I thought, I need to get these children somewhere warm. That was the entirety of my survival strategy on the morning my marriage ended. Get somewhere warm. Everything else was a problem for a woman I didn't know yet. I became her over the next 10 years, slowly, terribly, the way coral builds, one calcified layer at a time, in cold water, without applause. And the thing about coral, the thing nobody tells you when you're standing at a bus stop in February with a toddler on your hip and a sleeping infant in a stroller and your whole marriage folding quietly in the gray air, is that from the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. You look at coral and you see stillness, stillness, stillness. And then one day, you look again and there's a structure there that could survive a storm. Let me tell you about the woman I was before I became her, because you need to understand the distance traveled. My name is Sorcha. I was born in a mid-sized city that smells like industrial bread and river silt, the kind of place where ambition is considered a personality flaw and comfort is the highest aspiration. My mother was a bookkeeper with spectacular posture and a gift for silence. My father sold insurance and believed in the healing properties of strong tea. They were not unkind people. They were simply people who had decided, early, that the world was a fixed quantity and their job was to fit inside it without spilling. I met Radlow at 23 at a house party where someone had spray painted the words, "Eat the Aesthetic," on the kitchen wall in silver, which seemed significant at the time. He was handsome in that unfinished way, like a sketch that would resolve into something remarkable if you just gave it time. He told me he was going to build something that mattered. I believed him the way only 23-year-olds can believe things, completely, physically, with the whole dumb body. We were married at 26, pregnant at 27, abandoned at 28 on a Tuesday at the number 47 bus stop, with the trash smell and the stroller and the 22-month-old girl on my hip. What I have never told anyone, not my mother, not my therapist, not the women in my night class who became my closest friends, is what I felt in the weeks after Radlow left. I felt the unmistakable sensation of a cage door swinging open. Not freedom exactly, not yet. Just the sudden awareness of space where a wall had been. But before I could feel anything useful about that space, I had to survive. And surviving with twin toddlers and no income in a one-bedroom flat with a radiator that made sounds like a dying ship is not a philosophical exercise. It is a physical endurance sport. You count diapers. You count pounds in your account. You count the hours until they sleep so you can fall apart in private. And then you count the minutes of falling apart you can afford before you need to be functional again. My mother came for 2 weeks. She kept her spectacular posture and said very little, but she washed every dish and folded every piece of laundry with a precision that felt like love translated into a language she could manage. When she left, she pressed a folded envelope into my hand at the door. Inside was 300 pounds and a note that said, "You are stronger than you think, and I am sorrier than I know how to say." I didn't cry until I heard her taxi pull away. Then I stood in the hallway for a long time with the envelope against my chest. The children were sleeping. The flat was quiet. Outside, Pelworth Street went about its business. I made a decision that night that changed everything, though it didn't feel like a decision. It felt more like a shift in the weather, the kind you register in your joints before your mind catches up. I had been offered a place on an evening access course at the Trevelick Institute. It was a certification in architectural drafting, something I had half studied before Radlow, before the wedding, before I shelved myself neatly in the storage unit of our shared life. I enrolled. I found a childminder, a woman named Bex, who had 3 adult sons and a terrier called Admiral, and a laugh like a door being kicked open, and I enrolled. I want to be careful here. I am not going to tell you it was easy. It was not easy. I am not going to tell you I was noble about it. I was not noble. There were nights I sat in the class at the Trevelick with my brain so exhausted it felt like wet paper, and I thought, I cannot do this. There were mornings I snapped at Finn for knocking over his cereal and then cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes from guilt. There was a month, March of the 2nd year, when the boiler broke and I had to take the children to my mother's for a fortnight, and I lay on her spare bed staring at the ceiling thinking, this is not surviving. This is just postponing. But I kept going. Not because I was brave, because the alternative was Radlow winning in a way I couldn't name, but could feel in my sternum. The drafting certification led to a junior position at a firm called Crestmay and Harlow, a small outfit that did mostly residential extensions and the occasional community building. My supervisor there was a woman named Theodine, who was 61 and wore the same 3 linen blazers in rotation and had no patience for anything decorative, in architecture or in people. She gave feedback like a scalpel. She expected you to apply it immediately and without complaint. She was the most useful person I have ever met. Under Theodine, I learned that good design is about the removal of everything that doesn't need to be there. You start with the mess, and you cut until only the necessary remains. She had a phrase she used when a draft came in too ornamented, too anxious to prove itself. It's trying too hard to look like a building, she'd say, setting it down with a kind of elegant distaste. Make it be a building. I was 29 years old, sitting at a drafting table learning this lesson about buildings, and it was also teaching me everything I needed to know about myself. I had spent the first year after Radlow left trying to look like a woman who was managing. Theodine taught me to just manage, quietly, without the performance of it. The performance costs energy you don't have. Finn and Odessa grew. This sounds simple, and it was not. They grew the way children grow when a parent is watching from a perpetual state of slight emergency, meaning I noticed the milestones with a mix of joy and grief, because every new thing they could do was also a reminder of the things Radlow was not there to see. Finn walked at 14 months and said his first full sentence at 26. The bus is late again, which was objectively very funny and also broke my heart clean in two, because I remembered standing at the 47 stop with him, asleep in his stroller, and now here he was, narrating bus schedules with the gravity of a small philosopher. Odessa was different. Odessa was always going to be different. She drew before she talked, filling the backs of envelopes and the margins of my work papers with these dense, intricate grids and spirals. By the time she was 4, she was doing something that looked less like drawing and more like mapping. inventing cities, complete with roads and parks and tiny buildings. I would find them on the floor in the morning like artifacts from a civilization she was running in her sleep. I have sometimes wondered if she inherited something from me. Not the talent. She is well beyond anything I ever produced. But the impulse. The need to render the internal world as structure. To make something you can stand outside of and look at. Year 4 was when I started to feel something other than emergency. It arrived quietly, the way warmth arrives in a room that has been cold for a long time. Not all at once, but in layers, until one day you realize you aren't cold anymore and you can't identify the exact moment it changed. I got a small pay increase at Cresme in Harlow. I moved the children into a 2-bedroom in a different part of the city, near a park where Finn could run himself into exhaustion and Odessa could sit on the bench and fill her notebooks with her invented geographies. I started sleeping through the night. I went on a date. Once. The man was pleasant and asked me a lot of questions about myself in the practiced way of someone who had read an article about active listening. At the end of the evening, he said, "You're quite self-contained, aren't you?" And I wasn't sure if he meant it as a criticism or an observation. I said, "I prefer load-bearing," which was an architecture joke he did not get, and that was that. I wasn't lonely exactly. I was full. The children filled the available space in the particular overwhelming way that children do, and work filled the rest. And somewhere in the gaps, I was becoming someone I recognized from a long time ago. The girl who had been in the library at 17, reading about modernism with her shoes off and her legs tucked under her, who had wanted, specifically and fiercely, to make things that lasted. Radlow had intermittent contact with the children in the first 2 years, then less, then almost none. I did not make this easy for him, but I did not make it impossible either. I left the door open, the way you leave a window open, in case something wants to fly out. He sent money sometimes, inconsistently, and I banked it for the children, and did not thank him for it, and did not use it for anything routine. At some point, the contact reduced to a birthday text, and then to silence. The children accepted this with a pragmatism that was, I think, their inheritance from me. You don't wait for the bus that doesn't come. You find another route. I am compressing years here. 6, 7, 8 years of incremental things. A promotion, a project lead, a night class in structural engineering because Theodine told me to, and I had learned by then that when Theodine told you to do something, it was worth doing. Years of children's school plays and packed lunches, and the specific texture of a Sunday morning when nobody has anywhere to be, and the flat is full of the smell of toast, and both children are sitting on the living room floor doing their separate, focused things, and the light comes through the big window at exactly the angle that makes everything look provisional and perfect. I have a memory, one of those memories that arrives without being called, sharp and complete. Of Finn lying on his stomach on the living room rug with a book about trains, and Odessa cross-legged beside him with her notebook. And I was in the kitchen doorway with my tea going cold in my hand, and I thought, this is it. This is exactly it. This is what the other side of that bus stop looks like. I didn't say it aloud. Some things you just stand inside for a moment and let them be true. I need to tell you about Calder. Calder came in year 7. He was an engineer, not an architect. There is a distinction that matters to people in the field, and I will spare you the details except to say that the distinction is real and occasionally the source of light professional friction, and in our case, also a source of long evenings arguing about load distribution that turned into something else entirely. He had been a widower for 2 years. He had a daughter, Presty, who was 8 and had her father's eyes and her late mother's absolute refusal to be impressed by anything superficial. He came into a meeting at Cresme carrying a roll of structural drawings and wearing a coat that had clearly been rained on recently and not apologizing for it. And I thought, there is a man who is exactly what he is. No performance, just the load-bearing structure of him, visible and honest. I found this, I will admit, almost embarrassingly attractive after years of Radlow's constant self-narration. The architectural equivalent of a man who can't stop describing the building he's in while standing in it. Presti and Odessa became friends with the specific intensity that certain children manage. The intensity of people who have recognized something in each other that most people around them cannot see. They would sit at the kitchen table after school, filling notebooks side by side in silence, and you could feel the communion between them, the way you can feel weather. Calder was not Radlow. This seems like a low bar, and it was, and it wasn't. What I mean is, Calder was a man who knew what mattered and organized his life accordingly. And watching someone move through their days with that kind of coherent intentionality was genuinely startling to me. I had forgotten that people could do that. I had been operating on emergency protocols so long that stable felt foreign. We married in year 9. Small. Afternoon. Theodine came and wore her best linen blazer. Bex came with Admiral, who was not technically invited, but who sat with great dignity under the table for the duration of the reception and received discreet pieces of cake from Finn. And then it was year 10. Year 10 began the way most years begin, unremarkably, with January doing its gray contractual thing. And somewhere in the middle of February, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice, when it came, was wrong. Not wrong as in different from what I remembered, wrong as in smaller. Radlow's voice was always a performance, confident, slightly theatrical, pitched for the back of the room. The voice on the phone was the voice of someone who had spent a long time in a room alone. "Sorsha," he said, I'm sorry to call like this. I got your number from your mother." I stood in the kitchen. Through the window, I could see the back garden, where Finn had left his football in the mud again, and Odessa had propped one of her notebooks against the fence, open to a page of some imagined city. "Radlow," I said, "what do you want?" He wanted to see the children. He had rehearsed a speech. I could hear the preparation in it, the careful architecture of contrition, and he delivered it without interruption. He talked about therapy, about understanding, finally, what he had walked away from, about the grief of it, the years of grief. He talked about the man he had been and the man he was trying to be. He used the phrase, "I wasn't ready," in a way that was probably true and was also, 10 years out, only marginally relevant. I said, "I'll ask them." I asked them that evening at dinner. I presented it as a fact rather than a drama. Their father had called. He would like to meet. This is their choice, and I will support whatever they decide. Finn was 10. He looked at his plate for a long time and then said quietly, "I don't really know him." Odessa said nothing. She was filling the margin of her placemat with one of her grids. Later, when Finn was in his room, Odessa came and sat next to me on the kitchen step, where I go sometimes to drink tea and look at the garden. She sat close, the way she did when she was small, and she said, "Mom, are you okay?" She was 10 years old. She was asking me if I was okay. I looked at her dark eyes, her father's cheekbones, her own completely inimitable mind, and I thought, this is what I made while he was gone. Not despite anything, because of everything. "Yes," I said, and I meant it in a way I had not meant anything about my own well-being in a long, long time. The meeting happened in April at a cafe in a neutral part of the city. I did not attend. Calder took the children and sat at a different table and read his book with the specific, studied casualness of a man prepared to intervene at a moment's notice. Radlow arrived early, apparently. He sat in the window with his hands around a cup of something and watched the door. Finn told me later that Radlow cried. Not dramatically, not performing. Just sat there at some point with his eyes full and his jaw working and said, "You look so much like your mother." And Finn, my practical bus schedule narrating football in the mud boy, said, "Yeah, people say that." Odessa showed him her notebook, her maps of cities that didn't exist. He looked at them for a long time. She said he didn't say anything for a while, just looked. And then he looked up at her and said, "Who taught you to do this?" "Nobody," she told him. "I just always did." I heard this and I thought about the morning at the 47 stop, the stroller, the smell of rotting citrus, the duffel bag on his shoulder and the eyes fixed on the middle distance. I had 28 years old and I did not know yet what I was. I knew only that I needed to get somewhere warm. I got somewhere warm. I built something in the cold over 10 years, in the dark, one layer at a time, without asking for witness or permission. The woman I am now could not have been built any other way. The children could not have become themselves any other way. The particular quality of a Tuesday morning in my kitchen right now, Calder's coffee on the counter, Odessa's notebook stacked by the door, Finn's voice from upstairs already talking to someone about something that matters urgently to him, could not exist in any other configuration. Radlow has met the children 3 times now. It is careful and incomplete and honest, which is more than I expected. He cried at the cafe. He cried, apparently, driving home too, according to a mutual acquaintance who told me this without my asking and who I thanked with a composure I was proud of. I have felt nothing about his crying except a distant, impersonal recognition. He understands now what he walked away from. Good. Understanding is not amends, and it is not forgiveness, and it is not the point. The point is that my children are okay. The point is that Odessa is mapping cities, and Finn is narrating the world, and I am here, present, load-bearing, warm. There is a version of this story that is about him, about his absence, his failure, his eventual reckoning. I have told you that version because it is part of the architecture, but it is not the building. The building is this: a woman at a bus stop on a Tuesday morning, a stroller, 2 sleeping children, a terrible smell, and a cage door swinging open, and 10 years of deciding, one cold layer at a time, exactly what to build in the space where a wall used to be. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe. You don't want to miss what comes next.